The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, a rare occurrence in an era of artificial peace. Delegates from over 100 species sat in tiered rows, voices raised, translations humming in the background. The air smelled of sterilized politics, not urgency. Yet fear loomed over every word. The Arksari swarm had overrun another border world, the third this cycle. The Council's response had been protocol, restrictions, condemnations, and meaningless communiques. None of it mattered. The Arksari did not recognize language. They understood conquest, consumption, and overwhelming force. The Galari delegate, 9 feet tall and gelatinous, called for another economic deterrent. The Serenthi, crystalline pacifists, suggested empathic outreach. An ancient member, one of the original founders of the Council, spoke for the first time in years. His voice was weak but clear. Send for the humans. A silence dropped like stone. It had been 87 standard cycles since Earth had been invited into the Galactic Council. They had never responded, never attended, never contributed to discussions, peacekeeping, or shared databases. Their planet remained on the edge of known space, a member in title only. Most species assumed they were extinct, or too primitive, or too disinterested, but they had accepted the summons. The council chamber, a towering dome of glimmering alloys and suspended light, darkened as a signal came in. A transmission from a vessel identified only as UNSC Black Veil. Coordinates matched Earth system. Clearance codes were old but authentic. A date and time of arrival were confirmed. No agenda attached. The council erupted into quiet chaos. Who were the humans now? What would they say? What do they want? The elder who had suggested the invitation simply nodded. They will not say much, he whispered. They will show us. Speculation spread through private comms. Records on humanity were limited. Fragmented reports spoke of a brutal species that had endured 6 near-extinction events. A species that had mastered orbital warfare before discovering peaceful diplomacy. One that had not expanded, not colonized, and had no desire to lead. But they had survived, and that meant something. When the day arrived, security was doubled. News feeds were blacked out. External signals jammed. Every council member was in attendance. Then the doors opened. No announcements. No grand music. Just the steady thud of boots. 6 humans entered, walking in step, each wearing dark, scratched armor bearing no insignia. Behind them, rolling on quiet treads, came 2 tanks. Actual armored vehicles, covered in dirt, grime, and dried crimson stains. The lead one bore tally marks scorched into the side. Not painted, burned in. No greetings were exchanged. The human stood at the center platform, surrounded by representatives of species who had seen 1,000 worlds, fought psychic wars, lived for centuries. And yet they flinched. The humans were not tall. They were not grotesque, but they held themselves like weapons. Silent, watchful, as if they'd already mapped out escape routes and kill zones. One step forward, a woman, early middle-aged by human standards. Her face was pale, her eyes colder than space. She spoke slowly. You asked for help. So we came. A Murix diplomat sneered. What is this display? Do you intend to threaten us with your machines? The woman didn't respond. Another human tapped a panel on the side of the tank. A projection emerged, showing footage. Not simulation, not theory, but real-time engagement. Human forces on a jungle moon, moving through terrain, engaging the Arksari. Precise, efficient, ruthless. Another delegate stood, mandibles twitching. You launched a campaign without approval? We didn't wait, the woman said. You said it was urgent. One of the tanks hissed. Everyone tensed. But it was just the internal cooling system. The oldest council member stood with difficulty. You misunderstand them, he said. This is not recklessness. It is commitment. When humans choose to act, they do so entirely. He looked around. We summon them not for their diplomacy, but for their resolve. Their history is not peace, it is endurance. The humans said nothing. They didn't posture. They didn't try to convince. They simply waited. The message was clear. They were here. They were already fighting. and they did not need permission to finish the job. The council chamber, for the first time in 1,000 years, had nothing left to say. They didn't enter like diplomats. No flags, no ceremonial robes, no translators. Just 6 humans in scorched armor and 2 tanks that looked like they had crawled out of a war zone, still dripping the memory of violence. The silence they carried was louder than any speech that had ever echoed through the council dome. The tanks stopped exactly where the center of the chamber had been reserved for guest speakers. One of them had streaks of dried red smeared across its plating. Another bore impact marks from plasma weaponry. A few delegates murmured, offended, perhaps frightened, but none stepped forward. Their armor was unlike anything the council had seen. Not sleek, not polished, functional, worn from real use, not ceremonial drills. Each one of them carried sidearms, unloaded for protocol, but holstered with muscle memory that said they had drawn them before without thinking. These weren't soldiers bred for show. These were survivors. The human who stepped forward had short hair, gray streaks at the temple, and an expression that hadn't changed since entering. No emotion, no tension, just readiness. Her voice was calm, low, and indifferent to the grandeur around her. You have an infestation. You called for exterminators. That's why we're here. Gasps. The delegate from the Valari cluster bristled. Infestation? That's an inappropriate term for a species, however hostile. The human met his eyes. Tell that to the thousands they've buried alive in mining colonies, or the cities turned into breeding nests. You asked us to clean this up. This is what that looks like. The council chamber had been the heart of diplomacy for centuries, but diplomacy had failed. For all its splendor, the chamber was now reduced to watching a species that had been absent for nearly 100 years take control of a narrative in 5 sentences. A second human pulled out a datapad, projected it in midair. Maps, troop movements, energy signatures, weak points in the Arksari fleet. No preamble, no debate. They had studied the enemy more thoroughly than the Council's own intelligence branches. The projection shifted. Images of the enemy. Footage of battlefields. Chemical composition of Arksari hives. A detailed breakdown of psychological warfare tactics that could destabilize their cohesion. Data. Raw, brutal, clinical. The kind of information that came from field experience, not committee debates. One council member dared to interrupt. These are unconventional methods. Targeting breeding tunnels, propaganda broadcasts, civilian disruption. War isn't conventional, the human replied. That's why you're losing. Another slide. A recording of a human unit walking silently through the aftermath of an Arksari raid. Fires still smoldering. Bodies covered with emergency blankets. Children clutching food packets, watching silently as human medics treated wounds while tanks stood sentry. You believe peace is your default state, the human said. Ours is conflict. We didn't evolve in harmony. We clawed our way out of extinction 5 times. When we couldn't breathe our air, we made new lungs. When the skies rained acid, we built shelters. We don't break in chaos. We sharpen. One of the crystalline delegates tilted its head. But your methods, they're designed to instill fear. Doesn't that create new enemies? No, it ends existing ones. Her voice didn't rise. She wasn't trying to intimidate them. She didn't need to. Every sentence she spoke carried the weight of a species that had never had the luxury of idealism. Humanity hadn't come to lecture. They had come to execute. The tanks remained silent in the background, but their presence was louder than any fleet. Symbols of a planet that never stopped bleeding, yet never fell. Dried blood on the plating wasn't just decoration. It was a warning. It was history, and it was deliberate. They bleed, she said, pointing to the Arksari silhouettes still rotating in the projection. That's all we need. A junior delegate, newer to the council, whispered to another. Are they always like this? The older one replied. They're holding back. The presentation ended without a flourish. The datapad was closed. The humans didn't ask for questions. They didn't seek approval. They stood, waiting like they already knew the answer. Because they did. No applause. No formalities, just a pause that stretched like a silence before a storm. The kind of pause that comes when reality shifts, when the rules change, when those who thought they understood the universe realize something old has returned. Something dangerous. Something necessary. The council had asked for help. What they got was an answer. Not wrapped in policy, not filtered through culture. Just raw, unflinching readiness. And the message couldn't be clearer. Humanity wasn't here to fit in. They were here to end it. No one spoke for a long time after the projection ended. The council chamber, accustomed to endless debate and refined discourse, had been reduced to silence by 6 humans and 2 tanks. But the humans weren't waiting for permission. They weren't seeking validation. They were giving the council a chance to understand the reality they had ignored for too long. The woman with the gray-streaked hair stepped forward again. She tapped twice on the side of the tank. It responded immediately, projecting a new set of data. Not battlefield footage this time, plans, schematic overlays. A full breakdown of a tactical operation that would dismantle the Arksari's outer colonies within 7 standard days. Strike paths, decoys, psychological pressure campaigns, infrastructure sabotage. Human operations were designed to collapse the enemy before a full battle ever happened. This wasn't just war, it was artistry through annihilation. The council members shifted uncomfortably. One delegate spoke, his voice uncertain. You intend to destroy their food systems? Yes, the human answered. They won't fight if they're starving. Another interrupted. Isn't that unethical? She didn't blink. What's unethical is allowing another 10 colonies to fall while you argue about definitions. More murmurs. The humans weren't just efficient, they were surgical. They didn't engage in war for dominance. They engaged to end it. Quickly, decisively, and absolutely. Another projection unfolded. Psychological profiles of the Arksari leadership. Weaknesses in behavior, communication, loyalty. One of the humans, silent until now, finally spoke. Their alpha caste doesn't handle shame well. Humiliate their commanders publicly. Their cohesion drops by 30%. Council members looked at each other. The council's intelligence division hadn't uncovered that. We've been studying them for months, the human continued. We fought worse. The data shifted again. Economic forecasts, supply line analysis, target nodes for minimal engagement, maximum collapse. Every line, every calculation was built around one principle. Minimize human casualties, maximize enemy disintegration. You seem prepared for genocide, another delegate said, half accusing, half fearful. No, came the response. We're prepared for victory. She turned away from the projections. We don't fight wars to prove a point. We fight them to end threats. You've spent cycles trying to contain a wildfire with diplomacy. We brought the water and the fire break. No one interrupted again. They were starting to understand. Humanity didn't want to lead. They didn't want territory. They didn't want credit. They wanted the enemy gone. Their presence wasn't about power. It was about finality. The elder council member stood slowly. His voice carried weight, not just from age, but from experience. This is who they are. They do not posture. They do not bluff. When they say they'll end it, it will end. A younger delegate looked at the humans, still standing silent, unmoved, as if waiting for the next battlefield. How can you act so decisively? Don't you fear failure? A human responded quietly. We've failed before. That's why we don't anymore. Another spoke, voice low. We come from a world that tried to kill us for millennia. Ice ages, plagues, wars we inflicted on ourselves. We learned. Pain taught us how to fight, how to survive. Now we apply it. One council member, hesitant, asked, Do you have peace on Earth now? Yes. How? The woman looked around the chamber. Because we remember what it cost. And we make damn sure we never forget. The chamber went still again. The tanks behind them remained motionless, like sleeping giants. Every mark, every stain, every burn on their plating was a story. Not of conquest, but of purpose. A new data slide showed civilian evacuation corridors, organized, protected, fast. Human plans didn't just include crushing the enemy. They accounted for saving lives. Strategic, compassionate efficiency. The perfect paradox. You assume we only know how to destroy, the woman said. But you forget, We rebuild faster than anyone. Because we don't leave ashes. We clear the field for new growth. There was nothing performative in their words. No flair. Just fact. Humanity didn't see war as identity. They saw it as a problem to solve, quickly and permanently. They came prepared, not to persuade, but to act. A final projection blinked on, a countdown. Operations already underway. The council realized the truth. They hadn't come to ask. They'd come to inform. The humans had started hours ago, and it was working. Enemy movements were disoriented. Hive clusters were in retreat. Communications were breaking down. Every action the humans had described was already in motion. Real-time data proved it. You didn't ask for peacekeepers, the humans said. You asked for an end. That's what we're giving you. One of the tanks whirred slightly as it ran diagnostics. Still ready. Still waiting. They hadn't come to show strength. They'd come to demonstrate inevitability. And they weren't done. The council chamber had never felt smaller. Not physically, but ideologically. Generations of policy, debate, and fragile compromise unraveled in the presence of 6 humans and 2 machines forged for war. The room wasn't filled with enemies, but it wasn't filled with allies either. It was filled with species who had never seen what it looked like when humanity moved. The Arksari front collapsed within 2 days. Not because the council authorized action, but because humans didn't wait. Their operations unfolded like precision clockwork. Every engagement designed to paralyze, not just militarily, but psychologically. The enemy fell back, not from defeat, but disorientation. They didn't know what they were facing. The humans never reported to the council. Updates came as data streams, short, clear, unembellished. Outposts neutralized. Hive nodes purged. Civilian survivors evacuated. No flourish. No propaganda. No requests for commendation. They were simply doing what needed to be done. But what unsettled the council most wasn't the efficiency, it was the silence. No celebration, no statements, no declarations of victory. The humans treated success the same way they treated danger, clinically. They didn't see themselves as saviors. They were problem solvers. And the Arksari were just another problem with a deadline. The tanks stayed in the chamber for days. The stains remained. Deliberate. A quiet, visual statement of what it took to survive when diplomacy failed. Some members asked if they could be removed. The humans said no. Not because they were weapons, but because they were proof. The council met again after the front stabilized. A closed session. No press. No observers. Just members and the humans who had rewritten the playbook in less than a week. A proposal was drafted. Official command integration of human operatives into council-led defense strategies. The council had never made such an offer before. Power sharing wasn't their way. But for the first time, the council didn't want to lead. They wanted to learn. The human response was quick. No, not interested in bureaucracy. Not joining any fleet. No seats at the table. But one thing they said could be arranged. We'll leave a liaison, the woman said. Not to negotiate. To observe. If something like this happens again, we'll know before you call. Confusion spread. Then what do you want in return? Nothing. That answer didn't compute. Not for a council built on exchanges. But it was the truth. Humans weren't there for reward. They'd seen what happened when no one acted. That was reason enough. One delegate, skeptical, asked the question none dared voice before. Why did you even come? After all these years ignoring us. The human didn't blink. Because you finally stopped talking and started asking. Another delegate pressed. And when the Arksari return, when something worse comes, the human looked at the council like one might look at a storm on the horizon. Not with fear, but with preparation. Then we'll come back. With worse. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. One forged not from arrogance, but from the hard lessons of a species that had never had the luxury of being safe. After the session ended, one of the council aides approached the tanks out of curiosity. He asked one of the humans why they hadn't cleaned them before arrival. The human replied, because that's not dirt. That's warning. The aide nodded, but he didn't ask any more questions. In the following weeks, the Arksari threat continued to recede. Not because of diplomacy, not because of containment, but because for the first time, The enemy had felt something they never encountered before. Dread. They weren't just losing battles. They were being hunted, their patterns studied, their responses predicted. They were being dismantled with the precision of engineers, not warriors. Because to humans, war wasn't glory. It was math. The council debated whether to declassify what had happened. Public morale had improved, but explaining the real reason, the humans, was another matter. What would it mean for the balance of influence? For long-term politics? The elder council member, the one who had first said, "Send for the humans," gave the final word on the matter. They don't care what you decide. They didn't come to be known. They came to end something, and they will again, whether you approve or not. In the years that followed, the humans didn't send ambassadors. They didn't demand reparations or tribute. But when another system went dark without warning, a signal pinged across council space before any vote was held. A single data burst. Coordinates. A timestamp. An old signature. UNSC Black Veil. The council didn't argue. They just watched the sky. Because now they understood. When humanity shows up, it's already too late for the enemy.